Welcome, everybody, to the Spring 2022 Minnesota SDG Roundtable. Some of you who've joined with us before know that this is our opportunity to gather people who are thinking about, working on, advocating for the Sustainable Development Goals. This is also an opportunity for us to hear about what's going on out in other communities and to see and think about ways that we can be working together here in our community to bring the Sustainable Development Goals out into the broader public and community. My name is Mark Ritchie, and I have the honor of serving as the president of Global Minnesota. It's a 70-year-old organization that connects Minnesotans to the world and the world to Minnesota. And we've done a number of different programs, webinars over the years, bringing the Sustainable Development Goals to light in our community and on a global basis. Today, it's a very special opportunity in our roundtable to hear about one of the most effective programs happening nationally, one that we're considering for here in our own state. And we'll be hearing about that in the context of how, as a group inside of this roundtable, we've been working on greater localization of the SDGs. We're going to open this session with a very good friend of Minnesota, Tony Pippa, who's been one of our guides and one of the most important leaders nationally and for us here in how to understand and then to integrate Sustainable Development Goals work into our activities on a broad spectrum of issues. Tony's been for decades at the leadership inside of the U.S. Agency for International Development, serving in senior positions. But one thing that's really special about Tony is he was there at the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals, representing our government, the U.S. government, the Obama administration, in those post-2015 agenda development. So he was there at the founding, at the creation, and the advocacy from then on out. And Tony has been leading this work on the SDGs at the Brookings, one of our close partners, Global Minnesota's partners in Washington and on a nationwide basis. Tony, welcome back to our SDG Roundtable, and take it away.
Thank you, Mark. It's wonderful to be here, and really appreciate the opportunity just to speak a little bit about where things are with the SDGs in the U.S. As you mentioned, I was a special envoy to the UN to lead the U.S. delegation at the UN at the creation of the SDG. So I sat in the chair representing the United States in the General Assembly as we had 193 member states come to consensus and agree on the SDGs. And, you know, it was quite an inspiring, proud moment. But I would say, you know, for me, when we came to that agreement, it was kind of the pinnacle, I think, of global optimism of what the world could achieve together. And you know, much has happened since that moment in 2015. We're almost coming up on the halfway point of the SDGs. And some would argue so much has happened, it's kind of exposed the fallacy of that optimism. You know, when I was in the negotiations, I had many people say that what we were putting together was too ambitious, it was too wide-ranging. And certainly, if you put 100 people in a room, as my friend and colleague John MacArthur says, and asked each of them what they thought was the most important issue facing the community today, you'd get a wide array of answers. But out of those 100 answers, I'd be willing to bet that almost all of them are reflected somewhere in the SDGs. And that's the point. It all needs doing, and many times it's all connected. So it's important to have a framework like the SDGs, even in a moment where we've still coming out of 2 years of a global pandemic. We've had a reckoning on race prompted by the death of George Floyd. Even now, we've got an unprovoked military invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and sort of this deep and growing political polarization, I think these things prove how much we need the SDGs and how important it is to recognize the interconnectedness of so many of these problems, especially at their root causes, and to link these issues and to solve them together. I will say that having left the US government just after we came to consensus, and the SDGs actually started in 2016 on the path to 2030, the US government really, while being constructive during the negotiations and the putting together of the SDGs, really then took a step back in the Trump administration, saw the SDGs not as a policy framework that had much meaning for them. And the US at this point is one of only 5 countries actually that has not done a national review of their progress on the SDGs at the UN. But I will say that coming off of a report that we recently did on the state of the SDGs in the US, and a report that really showed that there are, if you look at the trajectory to 2030 and how close the US might come to achieving the targets that make up the goals of the SDGs, we saw a lot of red warning flags, especially on issues of people being left behind, significant challenges that might be facing our youth. I think significant difficulties in reaching some of the targets on gender equity. But we've also seen, I think, a growing appetite and willingness on behalf of the US government to start to take the SDGs seriously as a policy framework that would both guide the kinds of investments we're making overseas and the global leadership of the US, but also where it intersects with our domestic priorities. And the domestic priorities around equity and sustainability and where they intersect on issues of taking action on climate change as well. What's been really interesting to me to come out of the US government, sitting at the table where I was representing the national government and what commitments it was making, is to see the amount of leadership and action that's been happening at the local level and the relevance that people see within the targets and goals to apply to the local level as a way to solve local issues, but contribute to global progress by coming together to work on those local issues. And that's why it was very, I think we were excited to be part of some conversations that were happening in Minnesota that we'll hear a little bit about today, about how different stakeholders are coming together across sectors, from government to nonprofits to philanthropy and the university, to be able to collectively seek how to make progress together in Minnesota and what that might mean in terms of pushing on progress globally and aligning to the SDGs globally. The SDGs have also given us at Brookings an opportunity to think about different models for how stakeholders can come together to be able to collaborate and take the early next steps about how to make progress. We've been part of, and Mark, you mentioned this in the introduction, we've been part of creating a model called 17 Rooms in conjunction with the Rockefeller Foundation that we've created an event around. But it's also a model that other communities have been taking on. And I think we'll hear a little bit today about a 17 Rooms gathering that happened in Orlando, and talk about the potential for using that model to bring different stakeholders together in Minnesota as well, to look for how to act collectively around some of the targets and issues that are extant and existing in Minnesota and in the Twin Cities area as well today. So I consider myself lucky to have been part of one of the most optimistic and inspiring moments, I think, on the global stage at the UN as we came together around the SDGs as it relates to global policy. I know in the midst of all that we are dealing with today, it might seem as if it feels hard to continue to maintain that optimism. But I think out of the conversation that we have together as a group today, we'll hear that there's plenty going on and plenty opportunities for collaboration and collective action to take on these issues locally and to create some progress globally. And so, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for getting us going, Tony, and for all of your work to bring the SDGs to life and now to bring them into the full blossoming. And we've been working hard at this in Minnesota, and Karen Brown, who's director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Global Change at the University of Minnesota, has been one of the leaders both in the organization of SDG work on campus, but in the broader community. Karen, take it away.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to share my screen for a moment here. All right. I assume everyone can see my screen okay. So I'm going to say a few things about what's happening both at the University of Minnesota and locally with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. As Mark mentioned, a big part of my work at the university in the past couple of years has been related to the SDGs as the co-leader of the University of Minnesota's system-wide initiative on the Sustainable Development Goals with my colleague, Katie Pelican. I won't say too much about the SDGs that Tony just talked about, but we do use them as a holistic and inclusive framework for thinking about questions of sustainability from various perspectives. And at the university, our primary goal is really to support and foster work that crosses disciplines and sectors related to the SDGs, and really to promote the development of new programs and new funding streams for this work to ensure progress in Minnesota and beyond. The approach that we've taken is to really connect these global frameworks that Tony described to local priorities in Minnesota, and I'll say more about that in a moment. We've tried to have a strategic alignment between the SDGs and the University of Minnesota and state of Minnesota priorities, and we try to support faculty and students in their engagement, as well as to provide a set of research grants and connections with local partners. One of the ways we've been connecting with local partners is through the convening that Tony mentioned a few moments ago. In February of this year, the Brookings Institution, the United Nations Foundations, Global Minnesota, the West Central Initiative, and the Sustainable Development Goals Initiative at the university organized a local cross-sectoral convening entitled Building Sustainable Inclusive Communities in Minnesota. And what we were really interested in is how we could bring people from different sectors and different areas of work, higher education, local and state government, nonprofit sectors, private sectors, to bring all these folks together to learn about how we can work together using the SDGs as a framework to drive progress in Minnesota around Minnesota priorities. So how can this holistic framework serve as a way to catalyze and drive local progress on goals that are important to folks in Minnesota? So the purpose of this convening was to try to bring people together to foster some of that collaboration and movement on the SDGs and on sustainability writ large. And we did have a wonderful group of people who came together with us for a series of conversations. We had a wonderful set of presentations as well as breakout groups where people were really able to bring to the fore their concerns and their priorities among the SDGs for Minnesota. We had a number of very useful themes come out of these conversations, themes including the need to really include a very wide range of voices and perspectives in this work, to gather the data that will tell us how we're doing on the SDGs, and also to really work with people across different sectors to make sure that we're hitting on all the local priorities that are important. So there's a few next steps that we decided on after this set of conversations. And one is to survey participants to gather more information about their thinking on the SDGs locally, and also to broaden participation further, to have additional outreach, for example, with state and local governments, and also with diverse communities in Minnesota. And finally, an additional set of meetings and/or workshops, and I think you'll hear a little bit about some of what our colleagues at West Central have participated in along those lines. And I'll mention a couple of things we've done at the University of Minnesota related to that. So our SDG network, our SDG initiative at the university is very much a networked initiative. It's only works through a series of partnerships. And this is just a brief list of some of the partnerships that we are currently working with on the SDGs. You can see that we work across the university system, but also with a set of state and local partners, as well as national and international networks and partners who are helping us to make progress on the work. I'm going to mention a couple of specific partnerships for local impact. What we hope is that Minnesota can become a place that's a model for local impact related to the SDGs. And I think the way to do this is through collaboration and partnerships. And some of the partnerships that we have begun to work with include, for example, ESRI and the SDG Data Alliance, where we've recently had a workshop to develop an SDG data hub for Minnesota, working together with partners and housed at the University of Minnesota. Our U Spatial Initiative, our College of Design, and the SDG Initiative have all been working together. Our colleagues at West Central and other folks have been working on this as well. And so what we hope is that we can serve a convening or a platform function to help bring together the data that tells us how we're doing and identifies where we should go to make better progress. Of course, we work with the Gold Minnesota folks, and I mentioned already the convening that we did with our colleagues at Brookings Institution and UN Foundation. One other important direction we're moving is to collaborate with state agencies on their priorities. So for example, working with immigrant and refugee community work, the state of Minnesota, and also water and water quality work with the Environmental Quality Board. So these are all some of the ways that we're building on this local connection with the SDGs to make progress. I'm going to leave it there, Mark, and turn it over to you because I know we have more colleagues to hear from.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for your leadership in our community nationwide and at the university. Anna Washeka is the director of the West Central Initiative, which is both a community foundation based in Fergus Falls and the lead for the economic development region. She's been leading work in our state and nationwide using the SDGs to guide their activities there, and her staff and her board have been very active over a number of years. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Anna, take the microphone over.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I've always appreciated the support and just kind of constant information that you've provided to me in trying to work with the Sustainable Development Goals in the work of West Central Initiative. So I just want to say a few things about our organization and why the SDGs, I'll use the acronym, were so incredibly useful to us as a way to frame our collective work. So in the 1980s, the McKnight Foundation created 6 initiative foundations in greater Minnesota, really for the sole purpose of having people on the ground close to the center of the life of those communities, respond to the agriculture crisis in a part of greater Minnesota and the timber and mining crisis along the northern tier. So from the beginning, we were crisis responders, and I think that's important to think about in terms of our identity. What would we do if we were going to respond to a crisis in greater Minnesota? Well, we would do whatever we understand will make a positive difference. And what we now have, of course, is a global climate change crisis. So I think we already had that kind of in our DNA. Then in the 1990s, we took on the responsibility for being the regional development organization in exactly the same region of Minnesota. There are 10 of those, and our responsibility, each of us and of the 10, is to develop an economic development strategy and to work with mostly elected officials, cities and counties, to respond to and evolve the civic fabric, the common good, the things that we hold in common, like, for example, water treatment plants, so that the quality of life in these rural, mostly rural areas is, is really the best that we can possibly achieve. So we turned to the Sustainable Development Goals because we were trying to tie those kind of missions together. And we ran a test, which was, is there anything that we are doing now, planning to do, or have done in the last couple of years that would fall outside of the paradigm of the Sustainable Development Goals? And the answer was no. I mean, they are such a useful way of viewing human civilization and the health of the planet, and the governments and structures and cities and communities that we humans develop to keep life going. So we have found that they are extraordinarily helpful to us. And so as an example, you might wonder, like, well, how would you actually work with this? We are developing a dashboard so that we have some metrics so we can kind of clock progress, at least establish a baseline. That's just one example, and we're doing it in concert with some of the other regional development organizations. For our own region, we're developing a climate vulnerability study, a regional climate action plan, which we hope will be a step up from some of the local efforts that are going on. And there are a lot of efforts in Minnesota and all around the country that are going on. So that's very useful to us and to the goal we have of achieving our mission. But I also want to say that the Sustainable Development Goals give us a vocabulary. You know, it's a little bit like Esperanto that allows us to communicate with the state, with the US, with North America, and then of course around the globe. And that common vocabulary is power. You know, clarity is power. And I think it is an important ingredient in being able to master the incredible challenges that we have in front of us. So speaking about climate, communicating about climate, understanding the SDGs is kind of the backdrop, the really powerful frame for understanding all of the elements that go into climate and to civilization. I more and more think about this as protecting human civilization. Is just the SDGs are so incredibly useful. So how do we take some next steps? And one of the conversations we had in the meeting with the University of Minnesota and with the Brookings Institute, Global Minnesota, Mark organizing it, the UN Foundation, was to send some of our staff to experience the 17 rooms, which I think immediately illustrates this idea of the rooms in my house, right? So I have 17 rooms, but it's all one big home. The idea of economy being an earth in balance, a household in balance. So what I want to do is stop talking and turn it over to Rebecca Peterson, who is the Director of Development at West Central Initiative, and back to Tony, Pippa, and then Daniel and Jacob are here because they facilitated this 17 rooms exercise in Orlando, Florida. And Rebecca, please take it from here.
Thanks, Anna. And yes, my colleague Sarah Casey and I had the good fortune to attend the 17 Rooms conference in Orlando. And before I dive into that, I just want to say, Sarah's sorry she can't be here today. She's at a fundraiser for her child's school, but she expressed so much enthusiasm to me before we got on this call that I want to share with you, because as our Director of Communication, she said, Rebecca, I am so excited about the 17 rooms. And you have to tell everybody that I'm ordering signs. We're ordering at least 20 or 30 signs with the SDGs. I'm ordering 100 of these buttons, and I just have to tell the story of my SDG button and Sarah's enthusiasm about building awareness around the SDGs in our region, but also in Minnesota. So I was at a conference with Mark Ritchie probably 3 years ago. We at West Central had just adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as part of our strategic framework. And Mark Ritchie was wearing this button. And I said, I need one of those buttons. And he immediately took it off of his lapel and gave it to me. And I want to do the same for others. I have people walk up to me at conferences or in communities. I usually wear this on my spring jacket, and they say, is that a lifesaver on your jacket? But more and more people are walking up to me now and saying, I know what that is. That's that global initiative about sustainability. So we're building awareness, and I will jump into the 17 rooms in a minute, but to Anna's point, when we adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as part of our strategic framework, it was a really awesome exercise to have our EDD board come to be witness to our new strategy, our new framework. And we had big Post-it notes all around the room and sticky notes. And we asked all of them to identify things that are happening in their communities around these 17 SDGs. And they were prolific, you know, from food shelves to quality education to transportation. So we know that this is an intrinsic part of our region, and we're excited to do something more to build awareness around the SDGs. And 17 rooms seems like the perfect way to do that. As part of our work in development, we visit with the 9 counties we serve every year. So we have been introducing the SDGs at those meetings, along with the 82 communities that we serve. And we try to get to as many of the 82 communities as we can. We've been talking about the SDGs for 3 years. And we believe that hosting a 17 rooms event here in Minnesota would allow us to invite our elected officials, specifically our mayors, our county commissioners, our city council members, to understand more about the SDGs. So we did bring some slides back just as proof that we were in Orlando. So Carolina has access to those slides, and I'd like to ask her to bring those up at this time. It was great weather. It was hot, but of course, every place in Florida has air conditioning. So I was actually cold most of the time that we were there. We were there for both days. The first day was mostly presentations about Orlando. And, you know, I was never a huge fan of Orlando because I've been to Disney World. I thought that's all there was to Orlando. And the work that they've been doing in resiliency and sustainability is incredible. We met their mayor, I believe I've got it right, Buddy Dyer. And back in 2007, they adopted the work of Greenworks in Orlando. And they've been working on sustainability and resiliency ever since. We also got to meet Chris Castro, who's the director of sustainability and resilience. I actually, on the second day, signed up to be in his room number 13 of the 17, and we talked about climate action. So the first day we learned a lot about what's going on in healthcare, childcare, transportation, etc. in Orlando proper. And the history of Orlando is amazing. It's not just all about Epcot Center and Disney World, that's for sure. And then on the second day, we broke into the 17 rooms, and we spent most of the day in our rooms. I think that's even, no, is that Tony there with his mask on? I think it might be. In any event, we spent a lot of time in our respective rooms, but the most enlightening moment was at the end of the day when each of the 17 rooms reported out on highlights from their conversations. This is the climate action room that I was in with Chris. And we've always said at West Central Initiative, I think when we first introduced the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there was a conversation about, well, maybe we should just focus on 2 or 3 of them, to which Anna responded, no, they're so interrelated, you can't separate one from another. And that became really apparent in the reporting out at the end of the day when we had come back from our 17 rooms. Thinking about hosting such an event here in Minnesota, and here's the reporting out. One of the things that Sarah and I have been talking about is having a first day to really help the people who aren't as aware of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals become more entrenched. And I'm hoping I don't put Jacob on the spot and Daniel, but they were there for both days. And Jacob introduced the breakout rooms, and he did a fabulous job talking about base camp, talking about climbing the mountain. So Jacob, would you mind talking about your vision for the 17 rooms?
Sure, Rebecca, and thank you so much for having us here, and thank you, Mark and Anna and others who set up this roundtable today. I'd be very happy to chat a little bit about 17 rooms, and Anna really spoke well about how the SDGs set up a really powerful framework for the types of challenges that we face, at the local community, but all the way up to the global scale. And I guess 17 rooms is really trying to think about what is a process that can go along with that framework, that turns that framework into practical actions in communities. And I mean, one of the first things we do is say, okay, let's take 17 goals and turn it into 17 rooms, and create these spaces that anyone can come into and feel like they can work on the problems that matter to them, and that there is a space for them to do that. The second thing we do is really focus on action and have a real priority on what can we do in this room together as a group, and not kind of what can we do by 2030 or what are all the different things that we could do within this one SDG. But instead, we really encourage folks to get specific, and we say, pick a swim lane within a swim lane of the problem, something that's really ripe for action over 12 to 18 months, and think about how we could take some practical next steps to achieve some progress in the near term. And so that's the basic logic. And Rebecca was talking about the 17 rooms base camp. We survive in metaphors as a way to try and understand what we're trying to encourage together. And one of the ones that really works for us is this idea that, okay, if you think about the SDGs as a mountain range that we're all trying to climb together, we like to think of 17 rooms as a little bit like a base camp, and communities coming to base camp together to figure out how to get to that end goal in their community. And what we've noticed so far across the different use cases of 17 rooms is that people need to have different starting points, and it's really important to provide space and permission for different types of approaches up that mountain range. It's really exciting when you see rooms or groups of people who know exactly what needs to get done in the next 12 months, and they know the team they need to get it done, and they know what the resources need to be, and they just go for that direct descent up the mountain range. And that's super exciting to see that momentum. On the other hand, though, some problems are stuck and difficult, and they don't have everything lined up. And in that case, we see a lot of folks who turn up to 17 rooms and really need a campfire discussion before they can get to that direct descent. And then in between, we have this kind of middle ground where we see a lot of what we actually call the testing ground, where within your SDG of choice or focus, you might have a few good ideas, and you need a good space, a neutral space to come together with other experts and stakeholders in your community and, kick the tires on the different options, and then use this 17 rooms process to pick one or a few and move forward with that over 12 months. So that's just to give you a bit of a sense, Rebecca, of the kind of range of approaches we see when folks come into the 17 rooms process. And, we really drive towards action. And I think whether it's you're here for a campfire and just trying to hash out the problem, or whether you're going for the direct descent, all those types are kind of very valuable in terms of the types of progress and practical action that we need to bend the curve on these goals from the local to the global scale.
Awesome. I'm so glad you were here to say that, because you're so much more articulate. And I told Tony he could also tell people, but he couldn't do the Australian accent. So thanks for sharing that as well.
Happy to.
And before I give it up back to Anna and Mark Ritchie, Daniel was also at the 17 rooms. And I'm going to put Daniel on the spot too, only because Daniel has this incredible background. So if you could show us your background, I need that as well. And one of the things that we've been talking about, I'm just going to hold this up. It's our placemat that we share around. I need that in my background, because when I put it in front of my face, that doesn't work so well. But just making people aware is super important. And now I'd like to turn it over to Anna, who probably has a few parting comments before she turns it back to Mark Ritchie. And one of the most important goals that I always tell cities and counties, the partnership for these goals is incredible and it's powerful. And I just want to say on behalf of myself, I hope that WCI can partner on a 17 rooms event here in Minnesota.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. I was, I think I would ask Daniel if he's got some things he'd like to share as well, and Tony, because part of what I'm hoping is that we will be able to bring a 17 rooms workshop to Minnesota. So those of the individuals in the audience who might not, might unfortunately can't ask questions, but might have some curiosity about what would be involved with that. Maybe the three of you who are involved with this at the Brookings Institute could just give us some more information. However, I don't also want to usurp Mark's role as moderator. So Mark, if I've jumped on the agenda,
perfect.
you let me
Perfect.
know. Okay,
That's where we're headed.
good. So the three of you from Brookings.
Thanks, Anna. So let me just add in a bit of context, and then I'll let Jacob and Daniel also add a few thoughts. Jacob obviously really eloquently talks about the usefulness of putting an SDG on the table, but then getting very practical and thinking about what the next steps are to be able to climb the pinnacle to be able to achieve that SDG. But I think I'll just take a step back and say what I think is a little bit different and even valuable about the idea of 17 rooms as a process. So first off, thinking about it, and many of you watching are involved in the Minnesota community or even globally in some way. That's why you're tuning in. And lots of us go to conferences. And many times we're focused on a particular issue. It might be food or hunger, or it might be safety, or it might be car death. What's interesting about 17 rooms is that you're putting all of that on the table at one time. So it's sort of a comprehensive look at where the community or the state is on all the different dimensions of development at once. So you're not having to narrow down, you are narrowing down actually inside each room, but for what's actually happening across the state or in the community, you're not having to leave anything out. Every SDG gets a seat at the table, so it's comprehensive in that way. Secondly, and Anna spoke about kind of the common language that the SDGs provide. It's an opportunity to bring together the different stakeholders and leaders across different sectors. So what was really, I think, inspiring about Orlando is you had the city government there. You had the mayor, you had people who are working in city government. You had county government there as well. You actually had the Regional Planning Association that was made up of 8 municipalities or 8 counties and 60 plus municipalities. You had the philanthropic community, you had the community foundation and other philanthropies. You had the university, you had civil society. It makes, and you had business. So it provides an opportunity for all different sectors to come together and look for ways to bring their comparative advantages in a collective movement forward. And then thirdly, I would say, while you get to narrow down and be practical about what that important next step is to start to go up towards the pinnacle of that target by 2030, you also get to come out of your room and using some jargon here, cross-pollinate, right? So you get to see the interconnectedness in real time in your own community. What's really interesting is to come out of those rooms and to be able to share and say, well, here's what we were talking about around our SDG when we were talking about hunger, or around our SDG when we were talking about climate change, or our SDG when we were talking about education, and see actually where the mutual reinforcement is, and even the opportunity is for linking those particular actions that you were planning to take on that particular target. So those three things, I think, really provide an opportunity to do kind of a collective action and community problem solving in a much different way than is typical. And of course, it's all grounded in evidence, because you're setting targets and going to be agreeing upon how to measure your progress towards those targets over time. That's what the SDGs provide as a framework and the alignment overall. So I'll leave it there. And I think we would love to work with a group of leaders who are interested in bringing it to Minnesota. And it's very adaptable. So there's not like one checklist that everybody follows as they put something like this together. And I think it can be really customizable for where you are and what your needs are, and where a set of leaders wants to come together and to be able to seek for collective action.
It seemed like, a great next step for our roundtable. And we know, for example, like organizations, particularly our larger companies, have been pretty deeply involved. I know some of the even imaging from Davos this week had a lot of Minnesota corporations they're active in climate, on SDGs, et cetera. So I think we've had groups like the Germanic American Institute that have built out displays that have picked up on different elements, particularly in that case, the links between Minnesota and Germany and other parts of Europe on the SDGs. We, of course, have our climate change exchanges between Minnesota and German communities. And so there's also this general desire and general welcoming of the connectivity part within the community and beyond. And it seems like that's one of the great things about having this opportunity where Rebecca went down and can come back, the folks from Fergus heading up to Canada, possibly again. Are there other communities where, maybe I'll ask this to Daniel, but where, or Jacob, where you've gone, where you've seen the connection between cities, then accelerating other parts of the whole SDG process?
Yeah, Jacob, you might want to talk a little bit about the community of practice.
Yeah, thanks, Tony and Mark. Yeah, so a little bit more background on what we're calling 17 Rooms X, which is basically any community that's interested in 17 rooms, them experimenting with their own version and using the tools that we're creating. We now have a community of practice of over 80 organizations in total. About 24 of those have either done a 17 rooms or are in progress or are rolling up their sleeves at the moment. And they range from, we have some cities and municipal organizations in there, but a lot of the first movers were actually universities, and they found this as a really practical tool to do a lot of the kind of cross-sector, cross-silo work that you've mentioned, and providing a common language for different stakeholders of the university to come together and coordinate their approaches. And we've seen a bunch of different use cases, everything from, an exercise, a 17 rooms exercise that really just introduces the SDGs to the community and surfaces a lot of activities that are already happening. Back to the mountain range, there are actually a lot of things already going on, ascents up this mountain range. It's really just a question of bringing all of those folks together and sharing knowledge and understanding that, that all these things are happening, but also that working together can accelerate and empower those disparate efforts. So we've had that kind of end of the spectrum all the way through to universities or organizations that have been working on the SDGs for quite some time. And this process really serves as a way to catalyze really concrete collaborations after maybe a longer planning phase. And so that worked really well in East Central Florida. And, we have a number of organizations who are preparing to use 17 rooms as a way to say, okay, we've done the groundwork. We want to embrace the SDGs, but now how do we turn that into concrete collaboration? So really activating that kind of strategic planning exercise as well.
So Karen, have you thought about this specifically at U of M?
We've talked a little bit about it, but we have not made a specific plan for it, but it might be something that we could consider as a follow-on to the convening we did earlier this year. I agree very much with Jacob's assessment that this kind of a tool could be a really nice way to bring various folks that we collaborate with in various sectors together to see what work is happening and how it might be mutually reinforcing. I think, we would have to think through what Jacob raised about different types of convenings in the 17 rooms format, whether they're more introductory or more, trying to move things forward. Because one of the things we learned at our convening in February is that there is a range of levels of understanding and knowledge about the SDGs. And so, having both that function of introducing folks to the SDGs, but then for those who are already working on them, really using them as a way to move forward. So yeah, I think it could be a very useful tool for us.
And if I remember right, when you began mapping in your whole region, SDG related activities underway. I mean, it's a big map, many things going on, but one of the most interesting parts were the places where there was almost no activity that was SDG specific about one of the SDGs. Can you talk a little bit about how this process can also give us some information about where we're maybe missing out or need more attention?
I can, and actually, what we determined was missing. So first of all, there's a mapping project that we learned about from the British Columbia Council on International Cooperation. Their goal is to map all of the nonprofit work and civil society, NGO and GEO, I guess, work across all of Canada. And they allowed us to use their methodology because you got to figure out how you're going to approach this in our region. And we are densely populated with especially nonprofits who are trying to solve issues that are raised by the SDGs or identified, categorized. And but what we found that was missing is actually, because we were working with nonprofits, is actually what in Minnesota is being dealt with by the public sector. So land of 10,000 lakes, for example, water is very important. The DNR, Department of Natural Resources in Minnesota, is doing that work. So and that's helpful to know, right? So that first of all, you know who your partners are, but also so you don't mobilize to solve a problem somebody else has already solved. I do think Karen raised the one of the vexing challenges, which is some people have never heard of the SDGs, and some people know every tiny piece of information that you could ever learn about the SDGs. So in Florida, in Orlando, how did you all address that in those 17 rooms? What did you do with that kind of vertical integration of knowledge that always presents itself when you go to a conference? One of you.
Anybody?
Anybody.
Or Rebecca, what did you see?
Yeah.
Well, in my room, there were many levels of activity. So actually, most everyone in my room was from either Orange County or the city of Orlando, and they were already really ingrained in this process and this conversation. There was a gentleman there from Texas who was there just to learn. So he was coming in sort of at base camp, around the campfire, right? And it was really interesting because he had lots of questions and the other folks had lots of answers. And so it was sort of like in the room, we were educating each other, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that kind of joint education process happens a lot during the 17 rooms. And even when we do this in a lot of like the signature event that grew out of that we do with the Rockefeller Foundation really brings in experts on their particular domain from across the globe. And so, Anna, to your point, again, the SDGs provide a little bit of that common language, that common basis for everybody to get on the same page. But the 17 rooms, as it's been adapted in lots of different sizes. Like we've got some folks in Colombia who are thinking of doing sort of a multi-country exercise. We had a think tank and the Prime Minister's office in Iceland do one. So to bring together sort of the elites in that country around. And I think it's a pliable model, if you will. And I don't think we have to worry, like people will come in at different levels of their familiarity with the SDGs as a framework, but they're unlikely to come in with differing, they're going to come in with either a piece of work that they're doing within that domain or what they think are really important areas for the community to focus in within that domain. Everybody kind of has a point of view around that. And I think the model allows that to work itself out in that conversation about where the practical next steps are. To Jacob's point, it provides you an opportunity to get pretty practical. And we don't have to be experts, like we don't have to be experts in the evidence all the time to actually get pretty practical on the things that need to happen to be able to move forward together. And where like each of our institutions or the work that each of us is doing can contribute to that practical next step as well.
I'm struck by one of the differences when we started doing our SDG Roundtable 4.5 years ago, that there was a sense of how to pick up steam, but a sense of progress, on some of the bigger things, reducing, hunger and extreme poverty and all of that. Then COVID came along, altered organizing, definitely communications, but also really stopped progress on a lot of things, reversed progress on things like car crashes. And now we have a wider awareness of all the different wars going on around the planet. Thanks to having one in Europe, now we're talking about the ones that have been going on everywhere. And we're aware of the ways that those wars and internal conflicts and cross-border conflicts then have also slowed this and are also disrupting activity. And so it feels like 17 rooms in Minnesota will come at a time where there's a lot of just talk about kind of rebooting, restarting, restoring. And I'm starting to see workshops with those kinds of names like SDG 3 or SDG 2. I'm thinking that that's one way to try to build up a kind of positive initiative or some inspiration or some positive, hopeful feeling in a kind of a difficult moment. So it feels like one of the other aspects of this, in addition to the specifics, is giving people oomph about something that had, was really cranking along. And then, like many things, took a big hit. And now Tony reminded us, we're about halfway there, which is a good time to have some deep reflection on how are we doing and recharging each other on where we can go from here.
Mark, I think that's exactly right. It's a positive agenda and it's concrete. It can be concrete and practical. And back to the point that you were making about some of the businesses in Minnesota who are doing this globally, it's also a way to connect what's happening, what they're doing globally, connecting it back to what that's meaningful locally, and also connecting what progress locally means to global as well. It's a way to link the global and the local in a really meaningful way.
Well, we are getting near our 1 hour mark, and I want to give everybody a chance for last words and wisdom and advertisements of things coming up. I'm just going to call on you, Anna.
Boy, there are just so many things to think about. But one is, of course, that we have so much to learn by cooperating, right? The University of Minnesota is an incredible institution, and it's a land grant institution. Its idea is to extend the knowledge and research into the communities, and we're so grateful that we have them, and we have so much we need to learn. I'm very excited right now about citizen science because I'm very concerned that there's a general popular feeling that people don't understand science, don't believe in science, and of course led us to where we ended up with the anti-vaccine movement. And I think that extrapolates to the climate change issue. And so I think we need to figure out a way to help Minnesotans on the ground feel that they have some agency over science, so they aren't overwhelmed by it, but they can actually do things, which of course they can. So communicating about the possibilities and the opportunities and being determined to be optimistic is super important. And I'll close with that. Thanks, Mark.
Karen.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to follow up on what Tony said about the SDGs being a great local to global connector, because that's really what we've used it for at the University of Minnesota. And that's what's really exciting about it to us. We were really developing this initiative at the moment that you're talking about, Mark, when the pandemic hit and when the racial justice reckoning came in Minnesota. And so we really used this framework as a very locally based tool to help us understand and begin to address these issues and connect them to what's happening more broadly. So one of the things we've been most excited about is the framework is a way to connect equity issues across all of these other goals. And that's where we think it can be very productive and really generative in conversations to think about, for example, how clean water isn't just about clean water. It's about poverty, and it's about hunger, and it's about racial and gender equity. And so to us, that's one of the most exciting things about the framework. And I hope that we can use it in some of the ways that you've suggested, Mark, to really inspire an optimistic path forward to work on some of these issues.
Great. Rebecca.
I took myself off camera, so I thought you wouldn't call on me.
Oh, that's how you know you're going. Well,
I know. I think Anna and I talk about this a lot, that connecting with the mayors in our smaller communities, while small and large, is a great access point for us. Nonpartisan, people feel comfortable with the mayor of their community for the most part. And if we can work with the mayors to help them, give them the language and the tools they need to communicate sustainability to their communities, would be huge.
thank you. Tony, thanks for bringing this to us today and for all that you do and for being there at the creation. Close us out.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always inspiring to be with you, and to be with such a wide array here, even in the conversation today. And I'll close where I started. I know that our colleagues inside the national government are considering really recommitting themselves in a more holistic way to the SDGs. And they are looking to learn from local examples. And so this is an opportunity as well for Minnesota to be part of pushing that momentum for our government at the federal level, to be concrete and to understand what meaning the SDGs can actually really bring to progress. So I think there's a real opportunity there for you all to be leading our national government.
Well, we'll continue to look to you and Jacob and Daniel and others for guidance. We love to talk to our friends in Washington and urge them on by using local examples from here and say, come on, you guys, get going. And it turns out Minnesotans have a lot of friends in Washington, or people who are really friendly to Minnesota. So keep giving us guidance, inspiring, and we'll be connecting again as we all go forward in our individual work. But Karen said it the way that we are much stronger combined together. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to all of you who've tuned in today. This will be online, of course, for all of our SDG Roundtable friends and the public, and love to hear from you about your thoughts about 17 rooms and other things we can be doing together. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are on the planet, and thank you to our speakers and panelists today. Thank you again, all of our folks from Brookings. Bye now.